Hello, everyone, and God bless you. Welcome to the amazing Bible story of Noah's Ark, told in a way to help you drift off into peaceful sleep. In this version, you'll hear the story from Noah's perspective, his thoughts, his faith. Before we begin, I'd love it if you could leave a comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. Also, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories just like this. The screen is soon about to fade to black. The rain is softly falling, so let's get comfy, relaxed, and let's begin our journey into one of the most amazing stories in the Bible. Welcome to Noah's Ark. Morning sunlight warmed my back as I worked the fields that day, just as it had for 600 years. The earth smelled of barley and damp soil beneath my sandals. Then came the voice, so quiet I mistook it at first for the wind through the olive branches. But words formed in the stillness, as clear as if someone stood beside me. Build an ark. My hands froze around the hoe. 300 cubits long, 50 wide. The measurements unfolded in my mind like visions. I dropped to my knees, fingers digging into the dry soil that had never known more than seasonal floods. How does one build a ship where no waters flow? The neighbors' laughter still rings in my memory when I told them. "Old man Noah's gone mad," they said between gulps of wine. Even my wife's hands trembled when she touched my shoulder that night, her silence louder than words. For 40 days I walked the same hills, measuring shadows at different hours until I found the perfect slope. Just enough to guide rainwater off the roof, just enough incline for loading animals. That first gopher wood beam weighed heavier than its timber. As my chisel bit into the grain, I wondered how many trees it would take to reach heaven's dimensions. My sons found me like that at dusk, fingers raw, surrounded by wood shavings that stuck to my sweat. They didn't ask why. Shem simply picked up a saw, Ham began sorting tools, and Japheth started marking the next log with charcoal lines. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the workshop dust when I noticed the change. Where mocking voices once filled the air, now there were whispers. Children pressed hands to the growing ribs of the ark like blind men reading scrolls. Men who'd thrown rotten fruit last month now left sacks of nails at the worksite edge. One evening, as I oiled hinges for the massive door, my youngest grandson tugged my robe. "Grandfather," he whispered, pointing at 2 finches perched on the ark's bow. They came without calling. We watched as the birds fluttered inside, their wings brushing against fresh pitch that gleamed like dark honey. By the 3rd year, calluses had grown over my blisters until my hands resembled the gnarled wood I shaped. Each peg driven soaked up my prayers until the ark itself became one long conversation. The curve of each plank reminded me how little I understood of the storm to come, yet how completely I trusted the one who measured the waters in his palm. Final inspections came on an autumn morning when the air smelled of ripe figs. My sons and I walked every cubit, testing joints with our fingertips as blind men read Braille. The ark creaked softly beneath our feet like a living thing stirring in its sleep. That's when the peace came, cool and sudden as canyon shadows at midday. All questioning ceased. Though waters might rise beyond imagining, this vessel would float on the breath of God's promise alone. At dawn the next day, elephants trumpeted in the distance. A parade of creatures flowed toward us without goads or guides. Serpents sliding between buffalo hooves, foxes brushing against lambs. The ark's shadow stretched long across the gathering animals when the first raindrop fell. It splashed against timber worn smooth by years of our hands, sounding precisely like the word I'd heard so long ago in my fields. Build! Gopher wood felt different in my hands than the fig and olive trees I'd felled all my life. The first log resisted my saw until I found its rhythm, long, patient strokes that released a sharp, resinous scent. By midday, sweat ran rivers down my back, washing sawdust into the lines of my skin. We carried those first beams 3 miles from the high groves, shoulders raw from rubbing bark, while village boys tossed pebbles at our shadows. Each morning for months, my sons and I walked the forest trails with ropes and axes, searching for trees that stood straight and true. Sometimes we'd find a perfect trunk only to discover rot at its heart. Other trees split clean down the middle with a single wedge tap, revealing wood grain like flowing water. The logs that passed inspection, we marked with red clay and left to season beneath woven palm fronds. The sanding took longer than expected. My palm would slide along a plank for hours until it grew smooth as a child's cheek. Then I'd flip it over to find a knot waiting. Blisters formed, broke, and reformed until my hands grew leathery. My wife soaked them in salt water each dusk while our eldest granddaughter gathered the fragrant wood shavings for the cooking fire. What began as a single workbench near our home soon sprawled across the hillside. My daughter-in-law Miriam started marking our progress by counting nail buckets emptied. By the 7th crescent moon, we'd piled enough cured timber to build 3 village homes, barely a tenth of what we needed. One evening, I found him slumped against a half-shaped rib, his arms limp at his sides. "Father," he whispered, "should we bargain with the Phoenician traders for cedar?" The next morning, 3 perfect gopher trees fell in a windstorm, their trunks landing parallel as if placed there. The repetitive motions became prayer, measuring, cutting, sanding over and over until my muscles memorized every angle. I'd whisper the dimensions like verses while working, 50 cubits wide, 30 high. Sometimes birds would land on the growing frame, their claws tapping the wood as if checking our work. Neighborhood dogs started following me home, sniffing the resin on my clothes. By the 2nd year, curious neighbors began lingering at the worksite edges. Old Enoch brought his grandsons to watch us fit the keel, his gnarled fingers tracing the curve like remembering a lover's face. The baker's wife left barley cakes near our tools without comment. Even the village skeptic, Moloch, started bringing his students to ponder the mathematics of our pitch calculations. Once, during the dry season when tempers ran short, I caught 3 youths throwing stones at the bow. Their arms lowered when they saw me watching, not in fear, but shame, as if caught desecrating a temple. The framework rose slower than winter stars. We'd lift a beam into place only to find it warped overnight, forcing us to start anew. Some evenings, after the others slept, I'd walk the skeleton barefoot, feeling where board met board. The ark breathed in the cool night air, timbers creaking softly as they settled. Moonlight caught the pitch seams, making them gleam like dark rivers across pale land. On the morning we raised the last rib, the entire village came. Children balanced on Father's shoulders while elders leaned on staffs, their murmurs forming a low hum beneath the turtle doves cooing. No one mocked when Japheth and I climbed opposite ladders to tie the final crossbeam. The silence when we lowered the rope felt heavier than the wood itself. That evening, as fireflies blinked around the completed framework, Shem's daughter tugged my sleeve. "Grandfather," she whispered, pointing east where the first stars emerged. "It looks like a cradle turned upside down." I carried her home on my shoulders, her drowsy weight warm against my neck, while the ark's shadow stretched long behind us, a promise made visible. The scent of gopher wood clung to everything: our clothes, our hair, even the bread Miriam baked in the outdoor oven. When rainwater collected in the newly tarred seams, I'd cup my hands beneath the drips and inhale that sharp incense of resin and hope. People began leaving offerings at the work site. A basket of nails from the blacksmith, jars of oil from the widow Ruth, even a pair of pure white doves in a wicker cage. One morning I arrived to find a teenaged boy, one of Moloch's former students, sitting atop the stern with legs dangling. Instead of shooing him away, I tossed him a hammer. Without a word, he began securing the deck planks I'd laid yesterday. By noon, 6 other youths joined him, their laughter blending with the sound of mallet strikes. That's when I noticed the rhythm we'd created, not just in the work, but in the village itself. The steady chop of axes, the hiss of saws, even the children's games had shifted to mimic our movements. In building this impossible vessel, we'd somehow rebuilt the community too. The final inspection happened at dawn, When the rising sun set, the pitch seems glowing. We walked every cubit, testing joints and railings. At the bow, Ham pressed his ear against the wood like listening for a heartbeat. A woodpecker's tapping echoed through the hollow spaces, making us all smile. Later, as we shared a meal beneath the hull's shadow, Japheth broke the silence. "It floats already," he said softly. None of us asked what he meant. We just watched the dust motes swirl in slanting light, remembering how this all began with whispered words in a barley field. The numbers never left me. 300 cubits long, 50 wide, 30 high. They echoed in my dreams like footsteps in an empty house. At dawn, I'd walk the length of the growing frame, counting my strides. 75, 76, always coming up short. Our longest measuring rope stretched only 50 cubits. We marked it with knots at each cubit, the fibers fraying where we tied them. My son Shem found the solution in the silt pits. We rolled wet clay into long coils, letting them dry in the sun until they hardened into perfect measuring sticks. For shorter lengths, we used forearm to elbow, the cubit God had given every man. The village women saved their spindle rods for us, each marked with notches from generations of weaving. Rain warped our first attempts. A week's downpour left our clay measures soft, their marks blurring. Ham suggested carving notches into living trees as reference points. We chose 7 acacias along the ridge, their bark scarred with our careful cuts. Every new moon, we'd stretch ropes between them to check for stretching. Even the trees grew into the work, their branches bending away from the construction lines as if making room. Simple tools became sacred. Japheth's plumb line was just a stone tied with flax, but when it hung straight against a beam, we all held our breath. My wife's weaving pegs turned into alignment markers, their painted tips bright against raw wood. We leveled decks with water in hollow gourds, watching bubbles settle like tiny, patient judges. The rhythm consumed us. Each morning began with measurements, checking yesterday's work before adding new wood. Cut a board, check twice, fit it, join it. The repetition felt like breathing. My granddaughter Miriam started calling numbers in her sleep, her small voice reciting dimensions through the tent wall. Rolls emerged naturally. Shem's steady hands shaped joints that fit without gaps. Ham could eyeball a crooked beam from 30 cubits away. Japheth's knots held through storms. My wife organized tools with the same care she'd once arranged her spice jars. Even the little ones helped, gathering fallen wood chips to feed the cooking fires. Mistakes happened. A misaligned rib forced us to dismantle half a deck. We discovered it when rainwater pooled in one corner instead of running off. That evening, as I scraped the spoiled wood, an old carpenter from the village limped up our path. Without a word, he showed me how to sight along a board using his thumb. After that, we used shadows, waiting for noon when the sun revealed even the slightest warp. Numbers took on new meaning. 300 cubits became the walk from my hammock to the spring and back 30 times. 50 cubits stretched the length of our barley field at harvest. 30 cubits was how high my arms ached after a day of lifting. The whole village learned to measure in these terms. The butcher wrapping meat in cubit-length palm leaves, children tying reed boats together at exact intervals. Our first real test came midway through. We'd finished the lower deck when a sandstorm blew in from the east. All night the timbers groaned like a living thing. At dawn, we found the entire structure had shifted sideways by 2 hands' width. The neighbors gathered, whispering as we checked each joint. But the ropes and pegs held true. Not a single measurement was off by more than a finger's breadth. By the 3rd year, the numbers lived in our muscles. Ham could cut 30-cubit boards without unrolling a measuring cord. Shem shaped tenons that fit mortises perfectly, wood kissing wood like old friends. Japheth developed a system of hand signals, 2 fingers for checking angles, a palm flat for level. The final measurement happened on a still morning when mist clung to the timber. We stretched every rope we owned from stem to stern, from keel to roof beam. My wife walked the interior with her spindle rods, calling out numbers. The children ran between us like shuttle threads, reporting each confirmation. When the last call came, 30 cubits exact, even the animals paused. A hush fell over the worksite. Beneath my feet, the deck felt alive, as if humming some deep, slow song. Shem's wife broke the silence by pouring cedar oil along the center beam, its rich scent rising like incense. That evening, as stars emerged one by one, I ran my hand along the starboard bow and realized I could no longer feel where one plank ended and the next began. The numbers had become something beyond measure. The first sign was the birds. A great murmuration of starlings swirled above the ark one evening, their wings flashing copper in the sunset. Then came the doves, settling on the roof beams like living decorations. By morning, our work site crawled with creatures. Ants marched up the ramp in neat lines. Geckos darted between the stacked timber. A family of foxes slunk past the tool pile without glancing at the chickens pecking nearby. We'd built stalls and cages, but nothing could prepare us for the flood of life that arrived. Lions padded up the hill with no growls baring their teeth. A mother bear herded cubs past grazing deer. There was no struggle, no fear, just this strange peace holding all creatures in its grip. My daughter-in-law dropped the bucket she was carrying when a cobra glided past her feet to curl up beside a mongoose. The sounds overwhelmed us first. The lowing of cattle blended with eagle cries and the chittering of squirrels. Our conversation became shouting, then gestures, then resigned smiles. Every known creature seemed to find its way, from the clicking beetles in the grain sacks to the silent owls watching from the rafters. Food became our first challenge. Shem's wife organized the women to grind extra grain, their grinding stones working from dawn till dusk. The children gathered baskets of figs and dates until their fingertips stained purple. My sons built feeding troughs from scrap wood, their hammers never resting. Strange diets emerged. The hedgehogs preferred mashed lentils. The kingfishers only ate fish with blue scales. Space grew precious. We'd calculated dimensions, but never imagined housing creatures we didn't know existed. A family of otters claimed the water drainage channel. Bats clung to every shadowed corner. Tiny shrews nested in the hay we'd spread for the horses. The camels refused to enter until we lowered the ceilings in their stall, their soft groans shaking the walls. Cleanup was endless. Japheth's sons invented a system of scrapers and buckets, following the largest animals with determined faces. The ostriches kicked their straw into chaos twice daily. The elephants required whole bales of fresh reeds. Yet somehow the ark never smelled of waste. Only warm animal musk, sweet hay, and the sharp tang of wet feathers. The predators unsettled me most. Watching wolves lie down with fawns went against everything I'd known. The great cats would stretch inches from lambing ewes, yawning wide enough to show curved fangs, then lick their paws like house kittens. Once I found a viper sunning itself beside a nest of mice. Only when my shadow crossed them did the mice skitter away. The snake never stirred. Feeding times became our rhythm. At dawn, the birds called for seed. Mid-morning brought the milking of goats and the sorting of fish for the pelicans. At noon, the big cats got their portion of dried meat, always delivered with shaking hands by my youngest grandson, whom they seemed to tolerate best. Dusk was for filling water troughs and checking nests for eggs. Strange friendships formed. A blind crow rode on the back of an aged tortoise, pecking at fruit the turtle couldn't reach. The baboons adopted a lost fawn, carrying it between them like a sultan on a litter. Our watchdog, old and half-deaf, started sharing his mat with 3 rabbits. Even the termites that had plagued our woodpile now focused only on the dead branches we left for them. The village came to watch. Children brought handfuls of grain for the deer. Old women clucked over the fatness of the geese. The blacksmith marveled at the oxen's shoulders, the potter at the ibis's curved necks. Only the why remained unasked. Why this gathering? Why this peace? Why now? Final preparations blurred together. We moved bedding inside, stocked the last grains, checked every hinge and latch. The animals seemed to sense the coming change. The birds grew quiet, roosting earlier each evening. The elephants swayed in their stalls, trunks entwined. Even the insects settled into corners, their usual bustle stilled. On the 40th morning since the first creatures arrived, the last animal came, a lone gray wolf with milky eyes. He limped up the ramp just as the eastern sky darkened with clouds. As his paw crossed the threshold, the first raindrop struck my forehead. It ran down my nose, over my lips, tasting of dust and promise. Inside the ark, the animals didn't stir at the growing patter above them. The lambs kept napping, the cranes kept preening, the lions kept licking their cubs clean. Only the humans held their breath as I grasped the massive door. The wood groaned as it swung shut, cutting off the sight of dry land for the last time. The latch fell into place with a sound like time itself exhaling. Then came the rain in earnest, a roar that drowned all other noises, even the frightened beating of my own heart. In the dim light of the single window, I watched water trickle down the fresh pitch between boards. The wolf settled at my feet with a sigh, his tail thumping the deck once. Somewhere above us, two doves rustled in their cage. And beneath it all, beneath the creaking timbers and animal sounds and drumming rain, lay that same strange peace that had carried us this far, unshaken, unbroken, as deep as the coming flood. My hands had forgotten what it felt like to be empty. For decades they'd gripped hammers and saws, rope and chisel. Now, as I knelt to drive the final spike, the wood grain pressed familiar ridges into my palms. The setting sun stretched our shadows across the hillside, the ark's outline swallowing entire fields. My sons stood silent around me, Shem steadying the beam, Ham holding extra spikes between his teeth, Japheth passing a water skin we all pretended not to need. The spike felt warmer than the others, as if it had been resting near a fire. I touched its point to the pre-drilled hole, noticing how my fingers shook just enough to make the metal shimmer. Not from fear. After all these years, the work had carved certainty into my bones. But something about this last stroke made my breath catch. For every other nail, there'd always been another waiting in the pouch. This one would leave the tool belt limp. The first swing landed weak, the hammer's thud muffled by the dense gopher wood. I wiped sawdust from my brow and tried again. Something about this final joining felt different. Perhaps because I knew the sound would echo through empty chambers soon to be filled with living things. Below deck, Miriam swept stalls that smelled of fresh hay, her sandals scuffing marks the animals would soon cover. Exhaustion settled deep in my joints as I raised the hammer again. 50 years of labor pressed down on each swing. Harvest seasons missed, grandchildren born while I shaped timbers. The way my wife's hair had lightened from black to silver beneath sun and sawdust. I could chart the arc of my life by the calluses on this hand, each ridge marking a season of building. Japheth's hand touched my shoulder when I paused to stretch my back. He didn't speak, just pressed his fingers against the tendons standing up like ropes along my neck. Behind us, the village looked strangely small from this height. Smoke curled from cooking fires where women were likely preparing tonight's meal, the last ordinary supper before the rains came. Children's voices carried up the slope, their games unchanged by the massive shape looming over their homes. The spike was nearly flush now. 3 more strikes would do it. I swiped at the sweat stinging my eyes, tasting salt and iron. Half-forgotten memories surfaced. The blizzard that forced us to shelter in the unfinished hull. The time a sudden wind nearly carried Shem from the roof beams. The way the village elders had stopped laughing when the keel took shape. Every splinter pulled from our palms. Every drop of pitch that burned our skin. Every argument over measurements. All led to the square inch of wood beneath my hammer. A gust sent wood shavings skittering across the deck like nervous insects. Ham caught my wrist on the next downswing. "Listen," he whispered. Silence. Not the absence of sound, but a quiet so complete it hummed in my ears. No bird calls, no rustling in the brush. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. All across the hillside, creatures had gone still. The grazing deer lifted their heads. The sparrows paused mid-song. Even the ants halted their marching lines. Only the ark's shadow moved, stretching longer as the sun dipped lower. My final swings came slow and sure. The hammer's rhythm matched my heartbeat now, steady, inevitable. The spike sank flush with a sigh, not a protest. A single woodpecker tapped somewhere in the distance as if giving approval. Then the echo. It bounced off the mountainside, rolled across the valley, trembled through the deck beneath my knees. Not just the sound of metal meeting wood, but the closing of some great circle. Japheth's water skin slipped from his fingers, its contents spreading dark across the boards. No one moved to stop the spill. We sat there as stars emerged. 8 humans on a vast wooden island, surrounded by tools gone suddenly idle. The hammer rested heavy in my lap, its handle smooth from years of gripping. Down in the village, lamps flickered to life one by one, tiny lights against the gathering dark. From the trees below came a rustling, then the clear chatter of a squirrel. The world exhaled. An owl called. The great herds in the valley resumed their grazing. Normal sounds, ordinary moments, but never quite the same as before that final hammer fall. Miriam's voice floated up from the lower deck, calling us to supper. The others rose stiffly, joints cracking after hours of kneeling. I trailed my fingers over the last spike one final time. Its metal was warm, almost living, as if the years of labor had kindled some spark within it. That night, as I lay staring at the ark's ceiling, the tools slept in their boxes for the first time. My hands felt strangely light without their familiar weight. Through the open window came whispers, first just the wind, then something more. A rustling in the grass, the pad of heavy feet, the low call of creatures moving through darkness. The animals were coming, and in that quiet space between waking and dreams, the last spike gleamed in moonlight like a tiny beacon, holding the whole vast structure together with nothing but faith and forged iron. Morning would bring the first raindrops, but tonight there was only the ark sighing in its sleep, the tools at rest, and the deep, abiding piece of work completed. The final nail had been driven. The door stood ready. Everything that came next was in hands greater than mine. The massive door stood open one last time, its shadow stretching across the ramp like a tongue of darkness licking dry earth. We hesitated there in the threshold, the 8 of us and all those breathing creatures behind us, caught between 2 worlds. My wife gripped my arm suddenly, her fingers cold despite the warm wind. The homes we'd known for centuries sat quiet in the valley below, their cooking fires sending up thin threads of smoke. I counted them without meaning to 32, maybe 33 still burning. Morning light slanted through the doorway, illuminating dust motes drifting between inside and out. Someone's laundry flapped on a far-off line. A child's doll lay abandoned in the dirt near the well, ordinary things made sacred by their lastness. The donkeys shifted behind me, their hooves clopping softly against the deck boards. Japheth was the first to step toward the opening, his arms full of seed sacks. "They won't come," he said, staring down at the empty path. We'd left word in the village that morning, one final chance to join us. But only old Rachel had come, dragging her widowed son by the wrist until he shook her off near the olive grove. "They think we're mad right up until the rain comes," she'd whispered to me, tears cutting paths through the dust on her face. Then she turned and walked back alone. The door hinges groaned when I tested them, a sound like ancient trees bending in a storm. We'd greased them yesterday with rendered fat, but the sheer weight of the timbers made every movement slow, deliberate. A lizard darted across the threshold, its tiny feet pattering over my sandal. Strange how the smallest creatures showed no hesitation. The mice and insects scurried aboard while grown men hesitated at the edge of salvation. Ham began pulling the door closed from inside. The massive slab inched forward, cutting sunlight into narrowing slices. Through the gap, I watched wind ripple the barley fields one last time. A hawk circled lazily in the blue expanse where storm clouds would soon gather. The baker's daughter appeared suddenly, standing just beyond the shrinking light, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Her lips moved, but the sound was already gone, swallowed by the growing darkness within. Final cracks of daylight showed through. A slice of hillside here, a wedge of sky there, until only the thinnest golden line remained. Then nothing. The latch fell into place with a heavy click that vibrated through my teeth. Absolute blackness wrapped around us, thick as wool. Someone, maybe Miriam, let out a shaky breath. The animals had gone completely silent, not even a rustle of straw. My own heartbeat filled my ears, too loud in this sudden quiet. Then a single drip of pitch plopped from the ceiling, hitting the deck with a sound like a tiny bell. Gradually, other noises emerged. The cattle sighing in their stalls, water sloshing in the donkey's trough, the creak of well-seasoned wood adjusting to our weight. This was no ordinary silence. It hummed with presence, throbbed with unspoken words. I stretched out my hands and touched both walls at once, feeling the ark breathe around me. Shem struck a fire bough, the small spark illuminating his sun-weathered face. The flame caught in his wife's lamp, casting dancing shadows up the walls. Our family stood frozen in that flickering light, 8 pairs of wide eyes, 16 shaking hands. The lamp's glow showed the animals' eyes gleaming back at us from every direction, patient and waiting. "It's warm in here," my youngest grandson whispered, his hand tight in mine. He was right. All those living creatures gave off heat like one great heartbeat. The familiar sense of hay and pine pitch wrapped around us, so different from the dry desert air outside. Footsteps sounded above, Ham climbing to the window deck. When he unlatched the shutters, gray light filtered down through slats and hatchways, revealing the orderly rows of stalls and pens we'd built. Everywhere, animals blinked back at us, each pair a world unto itself, each breath part of this shared air. I knelt to run my fingers over the door's inner surface, feeling where its edges met the frame, perfectly flush. No crack for water, no gap for doubt. The same hands that had measured every board, shaped every joint, now tested their own workmanship. Outside, wind began to moan through the ark's rigging, a lonely sound already worlds away. One by one, the animals settled. The sheep lay down in their pens. The birds tucked beaks under wings. Even the restless monkeys quieted, their young clinging silent to mother's fur. Only the humans remained awake, watching lamplight dance across the ceiling, listening to the new world being born around us in darkness. The first raindrop hit the roof like a fingertip tapping for attention. Then another, then 100 more, until the sound became a steady murmur, constant as breath. Beneath my palm, the door felt solid, no shuddering, no leaking, just strong wood holding back the flood one moment at a time. My wife pressed her forehead against my shoulder, her exhale warm through my tunic. She didn't speak, didn't need to. The peace we'd carried through decades of labor now filled this sheltered space, as real as the timbers around us. Outside, the storm grew louder. Inside, we breathed together, human and beast, waiting for morning. Funny how darkness reveals what light cannot. As my eyes adjusted, I saw patterns in the grain of the wooden walls, whirls like rippling water, curves like the backs of swimming creatures. The ark wasn't silent after all. It sang in its own language, creaks and groans, the shift of 1,000 sleeping bodies, the whisper of grain settling in storage bins, a lullaby for the end of one world and the quiet beginning of another. We counted them at first, 1, then 10, then too many to number. That first drop struck the roof like a knuckle rapping on wood, a testing sound. I held my breath. Another landed, then a third, each impact precise as a heartbeat. The ark's interior smelled of warm hay and drying pitch, but beneath that, something new, dampness creeping into the grain of the wood. The animals knew before we did. The dogs stopped pacing and lay down with their chins on their paws. The sparrows, usually restless at dusk, tucked their heads under wings. Only the elephants moved, their great ears fanning slowly as if catching hints of the storm beyond our walls. My grandson pressed his palm flat against the deck, his fingers spreading like starfish. "Grandfather," he whispered, "it's talking." The rain had found its rhythm, no longer separate drops but a murmur running across the roof. Light leaked through the window slats in thin gray streaks. We didn't need lamps anymore. The sound built gradually, pattering at first, like 1,000 mice scurrying overhead, then swelling into a steady hiss. Japheth climbed to the window deck and came back with his tunic damp at the shoulders. "Just the beginning," he said, but his voice was barely a shape in the air. The goats huddled together, their sideways pupils wide. The rabbits froze mid-chew, ears pivoting toward the ceiling. Only the doves seemed untroubled, their throats vibrating with low coos. The ark creaked around us, timbers adjusting to the moisture like living things stretching after long sleep. Someone's hand found mine in the dimness. My wife's, rough from decades of work but warm. The rain grew heavier. What had been a whisper became a shout, then a roar that vibrated in my ribcage. Water found its way through the smallest gaps, tracing thin lines down support beams. The lamplight caught every drip, turning them into falling stars in the darkness. The children sat with their backs against the lion's pen, their faces tilted up as if the sound could be seen as well as heard. The lions themselves lay sprawled like house cats, tails flicking occasionally. It took 3 hours for the ark to move. At first just a shift, barely more than a sigh, then a gentle leaning like a man turning in his sleep. The water was rising. Outside, our world was disappearing. The realization settled over me slowly. No more barley fields silver in the wind. No more olive trees with their gnarled branches. I saw the village square in my mind, dusty tiles worn smooth by generations of sandals. The well where girls giggled over water jugs, all of it sinking beneath dark water. My chest ached, but the tears wouldn't come. Not yet. We'd prepared for this moment for decades, reinforcing the hull, calculating weights, storing supplies. But no one had told me what it would sound like. The endless rush of water on wood, the creak of ropes tightening, the way the animals' breathing synchronized until the ark itself seemed to inhale and exhale. By nightfall, the rhythm had changed again. No more separate drops, just one great voice speaking from the sky, filling every empty space. The children slept curled between animal pens, their faces smooth as still water. My daughter-in-law hummed a lullaby her mother had sung, the melody threading through the storm noise. I climbed to the highest deck where Hem kept watch. The window showed nothing but blackness and the occasional flash of silver where rain caught stray beams of moonlight. The ark moved more freely now, rocking in a motion that felt almost familiar, like being carried. "That's Mount Ararat," Hem said, pointing at a darkness that might have been a shadow. "We're past the olive groves." His voice held no grief, just quiet certainty. Below us, somewhere in the night, our old life was dissolving. But the deck beneath our feet remained solid. The walls held firm, and the door we'd built with such care kept the waters at bay. Morning would come. The storm would rage. But for now, we let the rain's song fill us. Not as a threat, but as an assurance that the promise was being kept. The first drops had fallen. The last would too. And in between, we floated on nothing but trust and gopher wood, listening as the world was made new. The world disappeared slowly at first. From the small window on the upper deck, I watched the floodwaters lick at familiar landmarks. The twisted acacia where children had swung on ropes, the flat stone where wives gathered to wash clothes. The village well vanished beneath murky water without so much as a bubble. My grandson tapped my arm and pointed silently as the old mill's roof disappeared, its wooden sails still turning lazily in the current like a drowning man's waving hand. The ark lifted so gradually we barely noticed. One moment we were grounded, the next we drifted like a leaf in a puddle. The sensation was less of movement than of the earth surrendering beneath us. Shem rushed to lower a measuring rope and called out numbers as the water climbed. 10 cubits, 20, 30, until the markings disappeared into darkness. The numbers should have frightened me, but instead, a strange calm settled in my chest. Every rise of water meant our obedience had been right, our work sound. Trees told the story best. The young olive saplings went first, their delicate leaves trembling as dark water swallowed them whole. Mature cedars lasted longer, their trunks resisting the current until the last moment. I knew each one had rested in their shade, harvested their fruit, pruned their branches. Now they became depth markers, their crowns shrinking until just fingertips of branches poked above the surface. Then nothing at all. The tallest palm near the eastern ridge held out until dusk, its fronds drooping lower and lower like a weary head nodding toward sleep. Sounds faded with the light. No more distant laughter from the valley. No sheep bells. Not even the evening crickets. Just the slap of water against wood and the occasional groan of the ark adjusting to its weight. The animals seemed to understand. Predators and prey alike pressed against the walls closest to the window, their eyes reflecting the dim glow of our lamps. Miriam's toddlers didn't cry, just sat wide-eyed in their mother's lap, instinctively aware this was no ordinary night. Waves etched our history on the walls. Each time the ark rocked, water surged against the outer planks, leaving damp lines that recorded the flood's progress like rings in tree trunks. During a moment of stillness, my wife reached out to trace one such mark with her finger. "Higher than the wheat silo now," she murmured. We'd built that silo together after the locust plague, stacking bricks with mortar made from river clay. 40 years of harvest stored inside. Had anyone thought to climb atop it before the waters came? Night deepened. The rain's rhythm changed from pounding to a steady drumming, each drop finding its place in the great chorus. Japheth's boys fell asleep curled between wolf pups and lambs, their hands tangled in furry warmth. Hem kept vigil by the window long after the last landmark vanished, staring at nothing but blackness and reflected lamplight. "Father," he finally said, voice thick, "what if we're—" The ark lurched suddenly, cutting him off. A grinding shudder ran through the hull, timber protesting against some unseen pressure. Every creature lifted its head at once. Then, release. The sensation of floating free, untethered from all we'd ever known. The walls creaked, the ropes sighed, the animals settled. Whatever had anchored us to dry land had finally let go. Peace followed, not the absence of fear, but something deeper, a certainty that resonated in my bones like the hum of perfectly tuned strings. The God who'd measured the waters in his palm now cradled our fragile vessel. No land in sight, no path but the one he'd made, yet complete assurance we wouldn't be lost. Shem caught my eye across the dim hold and nodded once. His face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. No words were needed. The same knowing flowed between us like quiet current. Morning light revealed our new world, endless water in every direction, the ark's shadow stretching long across churning waves. No more valley, no village, just this floating wooden world and its cargo of breathing things. Strangely, the vast emptiness didn't frighten me. Each swell that lifted us carried proof we weren't adrift, but held. The same hands that had carved riverbeds and shorelines now directed our course. Breakfast was quieter than usual. We broke bread without speaking, passing cheese and dried figs hand to hand. The animals ate willingly, their usual morning restlessness replaced by calm. Even the donkeys stood patiently as we mucked their stalls, their warm breath fogging the cool air near the rafters. By midday, the rain slackened to a drizzle. Sunlight broke through in patches, glinting off water that stretched farther than our eyes could see. My wife leaned against me at the window, her shoulder fitting neatly against mine as it had for centuries. "Feels different," she breathed. "The air." She was right. Sharper somehow, scoured clean by storm and flood. The old world lay buried beneath murky depths, but this new one shimmered with a kind of waiting brightness, like dawn before colors fully form. That night, Miriam sang a lullaby none of us had heard before, soft notes winding through darkness to settle over restless children and creatures alike. The melody felt ancient and new all at once, as though it had been waiting beneath other songs for this very moment. Outside, waves lapped the hull with gentle persistence. Beneath my palms, the wood pulsed with life, breathing, riding, enduring. Not lost, but found. Not abandoned, but carried. The waters had risen, but so had we. 8 hands to feed thousands of mouths. 8 pairs of feet pacing wooden decks. 8 voices humming to restless animals in the dark. We learned quickly how small a number 8 really is when tending a world. Mornings began with Shem checking the water levels in the storage jars, his long fingers counting each dip in the clay rims like a shepherd counting sheep. Japheth's daughters fed the birds first, scattering seed while the ark still rocked gently from night winds. My wife and Miriam milked the goats in steady rhythm, their practiced hands pulling streams into clay pots as the nannies chewed their cud. Ham and his brothers shoveled manure into the compost pits we'd built along the stern, their shirts sticking to their backs with effort. Space dictated our days. The children slept in hammocks strung between storage barrels, their small bodies swaying with the ark's movement. Cooking happened in shifts at the single hearth, gruel at dawn, dried fish at noon, grain porridge at dusk. We washed sparingly, using rainwater caught in hollowed logs. Every inch had purpose. Herb bundles hung from ceiling beams, tool racks lined the walls. Even the gaps between animal pens stored folded blankets. The tight quarters should have bred tension, yet somehow the opposite happened. When Japheth's temper flared over spilled grain, Shem would silently take over his chore. When Miriam grew weary from soothing crying toddlers, my wife would appear with mint tea and take the little ones to watch the doves. We developed unspoken rules: never wake a sleeping child, always leave the last portion for whoever worked night watch, touch shoulders when passing in narrow corridors. Strange moments broke the monotony. One afternoon, the children discovered they could make the lambs dance by humming certain notes. Another day, we all paused to watch 2 mice build a nest in the hayloft, their tiny paws working with solemn purpose. The ark smelled perpetually of living things, wool drying after rain, musk from the big cat's den, the tang of fermenting grain. Watch shifts became sacred time. Whoever sat by the window at night got to witness flashes of lightning illuminating endless water, or the rare glimpse of stars between storm clouds. We'd leave notes for the next watcher, scribbles on clay tablets about wind changes or animal behavior. Once, Hem carved a perfect miniature of the ark from a scrap of gopher wood and left it on the windowsill for Japheth to find. Food stores dwindled slower than expected. The goats gave more milk when sung to. The hens laid eggs nearly every day despite the rocking motion. Even the grain bins seemed to refill themselves. Every time we measured portions, there was always enough. We marked time by animal sounds. The lion's roars at dawn meant first feeding. The evening bird chorus signaled lamp lighting. When the elephants trumpeted, we knew a storm approached. Their instincts became our calendar, their needs our clock. One particularly rough night, the ark pitched violently. Storage jars crashed, children wailed, and the donkeys brayed in terror. Without discussion, we formed a human chain. My wife and I holding the youngest grandchildren, our sons bracing against the walls, Miriam and her daughters calming the animals. Hours passed this way, muscles burning, voices hoarse from singing lullabies no one could hear over the storm. At dawn's first light, the seas calmed. We surveyed the damage, broken pots, scattered tools, frightened creatures. But as the sun climbed higher, something shifted. The children began giggling at the monkeys mimicking our exhausted faces. Shem's wife found humor in how our hair stood on end from the winds. Even the goats seemed to smirk as they nibbled spilled grain. By midday, the crisis had become just another story to tell. Weeks blended together. The same chores, the same faces, the same 4 walls. Yet within that sameness, small miracles unfolded. My grandson learned to walk by holding onto the elephant's tail. Japheth's daughter discovered she could communicate with the ravens through clicks and whistles. The leopard cubs started following Miriam like puppies, tripping over their own paws. Arguments still happened, quick sparks over misplaced tools or misunderstood words. But they ended faster now, dissolved by shared glances or the offering of a favorite piece of dried fruit. Space that once felt cramped began to feel like shelter. The same hands that had built the ark now tended it, calloused fingers braiding children's hair, mending torn cloaks, soothing fevered brows. Perhaps most surprising was the laughter. Despite storm noises and animal smells and endless work, we found moments to smile. A shared joke about Ham's terrible singing, the way the turtle always won races against the hares, the baby's delight when the fireflies found their way inside. Nightfall became our truest rest. The animals settled first, then the children, until only the watchmen remained awake. From the window, they could see nothing but dark water and darker sky. Yet the ark held firm, its timbers whispering of safety in the blackness. 40 dawns came and went. 40 times we rose to face the same tasks, the same limited resources, the same 8 faces. Yet each morning, I'd wake to find my wife's hand curled in mine, hear the children's sleepy murmurs, smell the familiar wood and wool and life all around us. We'd entered the ark as a family. We emerged as something deeper, 8 souls woven together by shared purpose and survival, bound tighter than any rope could tie. The close quarters hadn't broken us. They'd remade us. On calm nights when the rains paused, we'd sometimes gather near the window just to listen, to the water against the hull, the animals breathing, the distant rumble of thunder. No one spoke much in those moments. We didn't need to. The silence said enough. 8 hearts beating, 8 lives moving as one, a whole world carried in one wooden vessel, tended by hands that had learned love grows best in small spaces. The lions taught me patience. Every morning, I would approach their pen with trembling hands, holding chunks of dried meat between my fingers. At first they growled, showing teeth as long as my thumb. But over time, they learned my scent, my footsteps, the rhythm of my breathing. Eventually, the male would press his massive head against the bars, waiting calmly while I placed his meal. His golden eyes held intelligence I hadn't expected, not just hunger, but understanding. The doves taught me hope. On bleak days when storms shook the ark and waters slammed against the walls, they would coo softly in their cage near the window. That sound carried through the darkness like a promise. Sometimes I'd catch my wife whispering to them when she thought no one was watching, little secrets she couldn't share with humans. Feeding schedules ruled our lives. The elephants required 3 bushels of hay daily, their trunks carefully exploring each handful before eating. The cats needed fresh meat despite the storms, so we dried strips of goat flesh on lines near the cooking fire. Grain for the birds, fish for the pelicans, tender shoots for the gazelles. Each meal a careful calculation made by fingers that often shook with exhaustion. Cleaning came next. Japheth designed scrapers from gopher wood to clear the stalls, while Shem's daughters followed with baskets for wasted hay. We composted what we could, piling manure in the stern where breezes carried the scent away. The process never ended. As soon as we finished the last pen, it was time to start again at the first. Unexpected friendships bloomed in tight quarters. The old mastiff adopted 3 orphaned wolf pups, letting them nurse even though his teats ran dry. The raven and the tortoise shared food, the bird pecking at fruit too tough for the reptile's beak. Even the snakes grew calm, twining around beams near nests full of sleeping mice. Comfort came from unlikely places. During the worst storms, when children whimpered in their hammocks, the elephants would trumpet reassurance that vibrated through the decks. When fevers ran through our family, the goats pressed warm flanks against shivering bodies. The monkeys made us laugh with their antics, stealing tools only to return them when we stopped chasing. Each creature reflected something greater. The lion's restrained power spoke of controlled might. The dove's return with an olive branch became our first sign of dry land. Even the lowly earthworms in our compost showed quiet purpose, turning waste into fertile potential. My youngest grandson claimed the fireflies were angels, and watching their glow pulse in the dark, I almost believed him. Learning their languages became necessity. A certain cluck from the hens meant eggs were coming. The donkey's ear position predicted weather changes. When the big cats licked their lips repeatedly, rain was imminent. We stopped needing to count days. The owl's molting told us when seasons changed outside our wooden world. The crisis came during week 27. 2 zebras fell ill, their sides heaving as they refused feed. The children cried while we tried every remedy: warm compresses, herb mixtures, even whispered prayers. That night, as I kept vigil, the female lifted her head weakly and met my eyes. In that moment, I understood true helplessness. Dawn found them both standing, nibbling hay as if nothing had happened. They taught me surrender. Egg collecting became meditation. Every morning, I'd move through the bird cages, my palms cupped to receive still warm ovals. Some were speckled, some pure white, some tiny as my thumbnail. The rhythm never changed. Lift the hen, check beneath, thank her with a scratch. Simple acts that anchored me when doubts crept in. Play surprised us most. The leopard cubs batted at dust motes and sunbeams. The otters slid down rain barrels into their water trough. Young goats butted heads in mock battles that left everyone laughing. Watching them, I remembered Eden before fear entered creation. By journey's end, we knew them as individuals. The scarred eagle who always ate last. The piglet with one white ear who followed my wife like a shadow. The old wolf who howled each evening precisely when lamps were lit. They had names we never spoke aloud but carried in our hearts. Final lessons came hard. The day the male lion nuzzled his cub toward me, I understood trust. When mourning doves built nests from scraps of our clothing, I saw provision. And when the first rainbow arched across cleansed skies, every creature fell silent, as if recognizing the covenant meant for them too. We disembarked changed, not just by floodwaters or wooden confinement, but by thousands of shared breaths with beings beyond ourselves. Their needs had shaped our days. Their presence eased our nights. In saving them, we'd rediscovered something primal, that all creation sings the same Creator's song, if only we stopped to listen. Now when storms come, I still hear it, the lion's patient breathing, the dove's hopeful coos, the elephant's reassurance rumbling through dark waters. Not memories, but echoes of a truth carried safely through the flood. We were never meant to shepherd alone. The animals knew it first. We were slower learners. The rain didn't stop for 40 days, but the darkness lingered longer. After so many weeks without sun, time blurred into something shapeless. We marked days by lamplight and hunger pangs, by the growing length of the children's hair and the deepening hollows under our eyes. Storms don't just flood lands, they flood minds too. I first noticed it when Shem asked what day it was. Blank faces all around. The calendar we'd kept near the cooking hearth hadn't been marked in weeks. Someone suggested it was midday, but the light leaking through the window slats looked like dawn. Or dusk. Or nothing at all. The ark's belly held a perpetual twilight, punctuated only by our flickering lamps. We invented rituals to stay tethered. My wife began each morning running her fingers along the same wall beam, counting knots in the wood. Japheth hummed the same tune while filling water troughs. The children played a game, who could spot the first yawn from the lions each dawn. Small things, but they kept the emptiness at bay. Work became prayer. Scrubbing troughs, mending feed sacks, even shoveling manure. Each motion anchored us. My hands remembered tasks when my mind wandered. Blisters healed into calluses, then split open again, leaving smudges of rusty brown on the grain sacks. I welcomed the pain. It meant we were still here, still alive, still moving forward through the unending dark. Strange moments broke through. One night, lightning flashed just as Miriam lit a new lamp, freezing us all in silver light, half-finished chores in our hands. animals mid-movement. For one heartbeat, the entire ark stood still. Then darkness swallowed everything again, leaving only the afterimage burned onto my eyelids. The children adapted fastest. They slept when tired, ate when hungry, played when restless. Their games grew quieter but no less joyful, tossing pebbles into water jugs to guess depths, braiding each other's hair by touch. Once, I found them teaching the wolf pups to howl on command. The sound should have been mournful, but their giggles turned it into music. Silences stretched, not the peaceful kind, but heavy pauses where no one could think of words. Conversations started and trailed off. Questions, "Remember the olive tree by the well?" were met with shrugs. Some memories already felt unreal, like stories someone else had told us. The outside world became a half-remembered dream. Food stores dwindled. We stopped measuring portions, eating only when stomachs cramped. The animals fared better. Their instincts told them to conserve. The chickens laid fewer eggs. The goats gave less milk. Even the lions moved slower between meals. Yet none went without. Every morning, somehow, there was enough. Disputes flared over nothing. A misplaced sandal, a spilled water cup, someone humming too loud. Words snapped like dry twigs, leaving brittle silence afterward. Apologies came slowly, whispered through cracked lips when the lamps burned low. Forgiveness took longer still. Then one morning, Ham didn't rise for his watch. I found him curled in his blanket, eyes open but unseeing. "How much longer?" he whispered. His fingers plucked at straw on the floorboards. No answer satisfied him. That same afternoon, a lamb was born 2 months early. Its tiny body fit in my palm, ribs fluttering like bird wings. It lived 1 hour, just long enough for the children to stroke its damp wool and name it Hope. We buried it in the compost, where it became nourishment for the next season's grasses. Life and death in the same breath. The night the rain stopped, no one noticed. Not at first. The constant drumming had seeped into our bones until we forgot it wasn't part of us. Only when Miriam shrieked during her watch did we realize. The silence was louder than the storm had ever been. We waited for it to return. Hours passed. A day. The ark creaked and groaned, adjusting to this new stillness. Animals stirred but didn't panic. The children pressed ears to the walls, listening for something no longer there. Darkness remained. Not the thick black of storm clouds, but the softer gray of waiting. Lamps burned lower. Breath came easier. Someone, maybe Japheth's youngest, began singing the harvest song we hadn't heard since loading the ark. One by one, voices joined until even the donkeys brayed along. It was Shem who finally named what we'd learned. "Faith isn't for sunny days," he murmured as we checked water stores. His hands, once soft from scroll work, were now as gnarled as old roots. "It's for the long dark." Outside, unseen waters still covered the earth. But inside, something had changed. Not circumstances, but us. Our hands still shook, our bellies still ached, our memories still blurred. Yet when the next storm hit, when wind screamed and waves slammed, we worked without speaking, passing tools in the lamplight, brushing shoulders as we moved past each other in narrow corridors. The children slept through it all, their faces smooth and untroubled. The lions didn't growl. The doves never stopped cooing. And in that endless night, we discovered an unexpected truth. Darkness doesn't create fear. It reveals what fear has been hiding all along. The strength we never knew we carried. The peace that outlasts all storms. Morning would come. Dry land would appear. But first, the dark, and the waiting, and the quiet miracle of 8 weary souls and a boatful of creatures learning to trust without seeing. The last lamp guttered out just before dawn. No one rushed to relight it. We sat together in perfect blackness, listening to water lap against wood, to the slow breathing of sleeping animals, to the whisper of someone, moving over the face of the deep. 40 days of rain had ended. 1,000 lessons were just beginning. The morning the rain stopped, nobody noticed at first. We'd slept through storms for so long that the absence of sound woke Japheth's daughter instead. She screamed, not in fear, but shock, jolting us all upright. The silence was heavier than the storms had ever been. Water still lapped against the hull, but softer now, like a mother shushing a child. No wind howled through the beams. No torrents hammered the roof. Just that gentle rocking we'd nearly forgotten could exist outside destruction. Miriam pressed her ear to the wall planks, her braids trembling. "Is it over?" she whispered. Ham climbed to the window first, his calloused hands fumbling with the shutters we'd kept barred for weeks. When he threw them open, gray light spilled across his face. Not sunlight yet, but the washed-out hue of clouds breaking apart. We crowded behind him, breaths held. The world outside wasn't the one we'd left. No more jagged lightning. No more waves like clawed hands grasping at us. Just endless water stretching to every horizon, smooth as polished stone. The surface reflected the fading storm clouds in swirling patterns that made me dizzy to watch. The ark's shadow stretched long across the water, black against silver. The animals reacted before we did. The lions stopped their restless pacing. The doves quieted after weeks of frantic fluttering. Even the goats lay down in their straw, chewing calmly as if they'd known all along this moment would come. Only the ravens seemed restless, hopping near the window with their glossy heads cocked. We moved carefully those first hours, speaking in murmurs, stepping lightly. The sudden quiet made ordinary sounds jarring. A dropped bucket echoed like thunder. A child's laugh bounced off the walls. Japheth's boys kept touching their ears as if expecting rain to start again any moment. By afternoon, the ark's rocking had gentled to a slow sway that felt like being cradled. We opened more shutters, letting damp air flow through the decks. It smelled different, sharper, cleaner, as if the storms had scrubbed the very atmosphere. My wife laughed when a dragonfly buzzed in through the window, its iridescent wings catching thin sunlight. None of us had seen another living creature outside these walls for 40 days. The children invented a game, dropping twigs through the window cracks to watch them float away. Each tiny speck became a fleet of ships in their imaginations, sailing toward unseen lands. Their voices, usually hushed beneath storm noises, now filled the ark with bright chatter. Our bodies remembered before our minds did. Shoulders that had been hunched for weeks slowly relaxed, hands unclenched from fists. Even the ache between my shoulder blades eased as if released by some invisible touch. Shem fell asleep mid-sentence that evening, his head lolling against a grain sack. Nobody woke him. Night brought constellations we'd forgotten existed. Stars pricked through thinning clouds, their reflections shimmering on dark water. The moon, whole and unbroken, cast a silver road across the waves. Some of us wept then, not from grief, but from seeing beauty again after so long staring at shadows. The next days passed in a strange suspension. No more frantic bailing, no more calming terrified animals during gales. The ark moved with the currents, drifting where it would. We fell into new rhythms, mending nets, checking food stores, watching the skies for signs. The ravens grew restless, their black eyes tracking something beyond our sight. One morning, the light changed, golden instead of gray, warm on faces turned upward. The children cheered when the first patches of blue appeared between clouds. By noon, sunlight poured through every window, painting bright rectangles on wooden floors. We hauled bedding onto the deck to dry, laughing when the goats stole our best blankets for nesting. Silence taught us things noise never could. How to listen to the spaces between heartbeats. How absence can feel like presence. The way peace isn't the lack of storm, but something deeper that survives it. My grandson asked the question we'd all avoided. How will we know when it's safe? I had no answer. So we waited, tending our floating world, learning to read water instead of land. The ark creaked less now, its timbers settling into their new reality. Even the animals seemed content to drift, their needs simple, their trust complete. The quietest moment came at dawn on the third day without rain. I woke to find my wife already at the window, her face bathed in rose-colored light. Outside, Fog curled off the water like spirits rising. Not a single wave disturbed the surface. The ark might have been floating on glass. We stood there together, watching the world hold its breath. No birds yet, no distant shorelines, just water and sky and this wooden vessel carrying all that remained. Her fingers found mine without looking. Neither of us spoke. After so many days of roaring wind and hammering rain, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. By week's end, the waters began receding, not in any way we could see hour by hour, but the ark's movements changed. Less rocking, gentler currents. The children swore they glimpsed mountaintops in the distance, though the rest of us saw only haze. Hope became tangible then, like another passenger aboard. On the last evening before land was sighted, we gathered by the largest window. The sunset painted the waters in colors we'd nearly forgotten. Gold melting into violet, reflected clouds glowing like embers. The children fell asleep in piles of blankets while the adults kept watch. Nobody suggested closing the shutters when darkness fell. We let the night air flow through the ark, carrying away the last stale remnants of storm. The moon rose full and bright, its light so strong we could see the water's surface rippling for miles. Somewhere out there, dry land waited. But for tonight, there was just this: the lap of retreating waves, the sigh of resting creatures, 8 souls breathing in unison with the woods surrounding us. The silence had become a companion. It asked no questions, demanded no answers, simply was. And in its embrace, we learned to listen, not just with ears, but with everything that had survived the flood. The quiet after the storm held more truth than the tempest ever had. It whispered without words that endings are just beginnings in disguise. The first raven looked suspicious when I opened the cage. Its beady eyes darted from my face to the window where gray light filtered through. I'd chosen the strongest bird, a male with glossy feathers that shone blue-black in the lamplight. He hopped onto my wrist, claws digging lightly into my skin as I carried him to the small opening we'd unsealed. "Go on then," I murmured. The raven hesitated. For one breathless moment, we both stared at the expanse of water stretching endlessly beyond the ark. Then, with a harsh caw, he launched himself into the air, a dark smudge against pale sky. We watched until his shape disappeared northward. He didn't return. That first absence left us unsettled. Was it good news that he found somewhere to perch? Or had he simply flown until exhaustion took him? The children pressed their noses to the window, begging the raven to come back with proof of land. My wife wrung her hands near the cooking fire, glancing up whenever shadows passed the window. 7 days passed with no sign. The ark drifted steadily, its movement gentler now as floodwaters began their slow retreat. Each morning I checked the horizon while my sons measured how much the vessel had settled in the water. The numbers shrunk gradually, 15 cubits deep, then 12, then 9. Progress hidden beneath the surface. On the 8th dawn, Shem approached with one of the doves cupped in his palms. "Try her," he asked. The bird's white feathers contrasted sharply with his work-roughened hands. We released her together. She burst upward in a flurry of wings, circling the ark twice before flying east. All day we watched empty skies. At dusk, just as lamplight began glowing through the shutters, a familiar shape appeared, beating tired wings back to the window ledge. The dove returned alone, her feet empty. Still no land, but her return meant something the raven's disappearance hadn't. This creature chose to come back to us rather than face whatever emptiness lay beyond. I stroked her breast feathers, feeling the rapid flutter beneath. She pecked gently at my thumb before tucking her head under a wing to sleep. Another week passed. The ark's rocking grew lazier, like a child's cradle slowing. We took turns watching for any change, a shift in watercolor, a distant shape that might be treetops. The children invented games guessing when the rains would start again. They never did. On the 17th morning, we sent the dove once more. This time Japheth's daughter held her before release, whispering secrets into downy feathers. The bird seemed stronger now after days of rest. her wings pumping steadily as she flew beyond our sight. Sunlight slanted through the window at midday, casting warm rectangles on floorboards we'd long since scrubbed smooth. The animals dozed in their pens except for the restless ravens. 3 remained, hopping between perches with odd cries. Miriam swore they were calling for their lost companion. Evening fell soft that day. The sky turned the color of ripe peaches, then deepened to violet. We just lit the evening lamps when him shouted from the window deck. The dove returned, not empty-clawed this time. She alighted on the sill with something green clutched in her beak, a fresh olive leaf torn from some distant tree. The children gasped. My wife clutched my arm so tightly her nails left crescent marks. That tiny leaf held more meaning than any flood report. Land existed somewhere, not just dry ground, but living plants. The olive leaf still gleamed with sap when I took it carefully from the dove's beak, its edges slightly ragged where she'd plucked it. The children passed it between them in reverent silence while the dove preened nearby as if pleased with her triumph. We released her again 3 days later. This time she didn't return at all. The ravens grew restless as we prepared to unseal the main door. The lions paced their pen whenever someone climbed to the observation deck. Even the goats seemed aware of change coming. They butted heads more vigorously, their horns clacking like celebration. Each new sign built upon the last. First the retreating waters, then the dove's proof, finally the ark's timbers grating against something solid during the night. When I pressed my ear to the hull, I heard unfamiliar sounds, rocks scraping wood, then stillness. Morning light revealed what we dreamed of for months, mountaintops piercing the water's surface like fingers reaching for sky. The ark rested against one, its bow wedged securely between 2 crags. Trees grew further up the slope, their branches bearing the same waxy leaves our dove had brought. The ravens were first to explore. They hopped through the door with none of the hesitation their brother had shown weeks before. The lions roared when fresh air rushed in, scented with wet earth and things growing. My wife wept into her hands, not from sadness, but from seeing that stubborn olive leaf's promise kept. Children darted to the opening, bare feet slapping damp wood. They stopped just at the threshold, peering out at the strange new world. Behind them, animals stirred in their pens, sniffing winds that carried no salt spray. Everything smelled different, greener, sharper, alive with possibilities. I stood in the doorway between 2 worlds, one of wood and memory, the other of mud and rebirth. The same voice that had commanded, build, now whispered, go forth. Between those words lay the flood, the waiting, the quiet lessons of trust. The first step onto solid ground felt foreign after so long floating. Damp soil yielded beneath my sandal, leaving a print that filled slowly with water. Around me, creation stirred, insects buzzing, birds calling, somewhere the splash of fish in retreating pools. A world washed clean. Behind us the ark stood empty, its doors thrown wide as animals streamed down the ramp. The children chased laughing through puddles while my sons scanned the horizon for familiar landmarks that no longer existed. Everything had changed. Yet when I turned back toward the mountainside, there she was, the dove, perched atop the ark's highest point, watching over us all. One last guardian before taking wing toward whatever new future awaited. The olive leaf had been first promise. Now came the keeping. The shudder ran through the ark's timbers before we heard the scrape. Would meeting stone, not with violence but finality, like a door closing after a long journey. Ararat's slopes cradled us gently that morning, its rocks still dark with retreating waters. After so many months adrift, solid ground felt foreign underfoot. My knees buckled when I first stepped onto the mountainside, hands sinking into mud still cold from the flood's depths. The children reacted first. They hooped and scrambled over unfamiliar rocks, their bare feet leaving prints that fogged with moisture. Shem's daughter pressed her palm against an outcrop, then brought it to her nose to smell the mineral tang. Animals hesitated at the ramp's edge, elk testing the air with wet noses, foxes cocking their heads at the absence of waves. Even lions paused before setting paw on earth again, their massive shoulders rolling as they adjusted to stillness. I climbed higher to where the air grew thin. Below me, the ark lay like a discarded husk against the mountain's flank, its pitched roof streaked with bird droppings and weather stains. From this angle, I could see where floodwaters had polished the lower rock smooth, their surfaces still glistening. The silence here was different from the ark's. Not the hush of confinement, but the quiet of a world catching its breath. At midday, we built our first fire on land. The wood smoked at first, and used to burning after months submerged. My wife crouched to feed the flames with twigs gathered from higher slopes, her fingers trembling each time they neared the heat. The children gathered round, stretching hands toward a warmth they'd nearly forgotten. We roasted the last of our dried fish, the smell mingling with wet earth and stone. Japheth found the spring first, a thin trickle cutting through rocks near the summit. He called us upslope to watch clear water bubble from stone, cold enough to make our teeth ache when we cupped it to our mouths. The animals sensed it too. Soon deer and goats picked their way toward the source, their hooves clicking on wet stone. That evening we heard birdsong for the first time in a year, a lone thrush calling from a stunted pine that had somehow survived the flood. The mountain became our altar. I stacked stones where the spring emerged, each one chosen for its smoothness from the scattered rubble. Every day another small pile grew, markers of remembrance where we'd slept, where the ravens first flew free, where the dove brought back her leaf. The children decorated them with wildflowers that sprouted almost overnight, their bright petals softening the gray rock. Nightfall on Ararat felt different from nights adrift. Without the ark's creaking, we heard new sounds. Wind through mountain passes, distant waterfalls, the scrabble of creatures returning to the world. The stars burned clearer here, undimmed by sea mist. I watched constellations drift past while the children slept curled together like puppies, their faces turned toward open sky instead of wooden ceilings. Morning revealed changes. Green shoots pushed through mud where nothing had grown yesterday. A spider spun her web between two rocks near our sleeping area. Flies discovered the drying fish racks and buzzed in lazy circles. Life was stitching itself back together while we watched. On the third day, Ham and I climbed to a ridge overlooking the valleys. The waters still stretched far below, but now with channels and inlets forming. Patches of land emerged like the backs of sleeping giants. We sat there in silence, chewing strips of smoked venison, watching sunlight play across the ruined world. He pointed suddenly, down in a distant valley, movement, too large for birds. Might have been deer, or perhaps our missing raven finding its way home. Neither of us spoke of the empty villages that must lie beneath those waters. That evening I chose 7 smooth stones from the spring's edge. While family and animals slept, I arranged them near the highest marker pile, one for each life lost to the flood, one for each day of creation. The moon lit them silver as I whispered names remembered from a drowned world. When the wind picked up, it carried the scent of rain coming. Not the endless deluge we'd known, but the gentle, seasonal sort that nourishes crops. The ark creaked occasionally below us, settling into its final resting place. Already vines had begun curling around its lower timbers, as if the earth sought to reclaim it. In the fading light, I could see where years of weathering would gray the wood, where animals would make nests in its corners, where one day only the outline would remain beneath layers of soil. Sleep came easier on solid ground. Dreams were different too, not of endless water, but of the mountain growing greener each night. On waking, I'd find my hands still clenched as if gripping tools, my muscles remembering decades of labor that had brought us here. The morning air smelled of damp cedar and something new, the aroma of earth remaking itself. One afternoon we found petals scattered near our markers. None of us had picked flowers, yet there they lay, bright yellows and purples arranged in careful circles. The children believed angels left them. My wife thought wind. Japheth swore he'd seen a fox carrying blossoms in its mouth. We let the mystery be. Some gifts don't need explaining. As the valleys dried, we prepared to descend. The ark would stay behind, its work done. We packed only what we could carry: tools, seed bags, the memories of those lost. Before leaving, each of us placed a hand on its weathered hull one final time. The wood was warmer than expected, as if storing sunlight against colder days ahead. From the lower slopes, Ararat looked taller. Clouds wreathed its peak like a crown, hiding the markers we'd placed there. The children chattered about where to build our first home, which valleys looked fertile, whether we'd find other survivors. I walked last in line, turning every few steps to watch the mountain shrink behind us. That night, around a new fire, Shem asked if I thought we'd ever return. Flames reflected in his eyes as we listened to unfamiliar insects singing in the dark. The answer came without thinking. We don't need to. Ararat had done its work, held us when the world was drowning, gave us footing when we were unmoored, became the altar where we laid down our grief. Some mountains exist to be climbed beyond. Morning found us walking eastward, following the sun's path toward whatever came next. Behind us, the first rainbow arced over retreating waters, its colors shimmering against gray stone. We didn't point or cheer, just walked on, carrying the mountain in our bones, trusting the earth to remember what we could not. The storm clouds were breaking apart when it happened. That first glimpse of blue sky seemed enough miracle after months of gray. Then the sun emerged, not the harsh glare we'd feared, but a gentle light that warmed our faces without burning. It caught the lingering moisture in the air just so. I was helping Japheth untangle fishing nets when my grandson gasped. His small finger pointed eastward where the valley still glistened with retreating waters. There it arched, colors more vivid than any dye we'd ever mixed, shimmering against the dark clouds like a bridge between heaven and earth. We dropped the nets. Miriam fell to her knees. Even the animals still milling around camp turned their heads toward that impossible spectrum. The colors deepened as we watched, red bleeding into orange, gold fading to green, then blue to purple, each shade precisely defined yet blending seamlessly with the next. For the first time since leaving the Ark, complete silence fell over our family. The rainbow's curve mirrored the Ark's hull exactly. I could see it in my mind's eye, that same perfect arc we'd measured and sanded and sealed. Only this wasn't wood and pitch, but light itself made tangible. Water droplets became prisms, transforming the sun's white glare into this living promise. Tears ran down my wife's cheeks, though she wasn't weeping. None of us were. Not really. It was more like our bodies couldn't contain what our eyes beheld. My fingers found the olive leaf I kept in my pouch, now brittle but still green at its core. Both signs spoke the same language. We'd seen rainbows before, of course. Fishermen knew them as sunlight-piercing storm clouds at certain angles. Children would point at their brief appearance after summer showers. But this was different. The colors burned brighter. The arch stretched wider. It didn't fade after minutes, but remained until long shadows stretched across our camp. Footsteps approached from behind, Ham and Shem returning from checking traps. They froze when they saw our upturned faces. Neither asked what we were staring at. The light reflecting in their wide eyes answered for them. The rainbow touched earth at both ends like it was drinking from the valleys. I'd spent 60 years measuring cubits and spans, yet this defied all dimensions. Its colors had weight somehow, pressing into my ribs until breathing became worship. Miriam's daughter broke the silence. "Is it a doorway?" she whispered. The question hung there as the rainbow intensified, its colors somehow separate yet woven together, like strands in a tapestry only heaven could weave. Science couldn't explain this feeling. We all knew how light divided through water, but knowledge paled beside the certainty settling over us, that this arch wasn't just physics, but a signature. The same voice that had whispered, "Build an ark," now painted the sky with covenant. I remembered sudden moments from the flood, the dove's wings beating against storm winds, the feel of that first raindrop, the way lions and lambs had slept back to back in the ark's belly, all leading here, to this hillside where colors spoke louder than words ever could. The rainbow faded gradually, from purple inward, like a flower closing at dusk. Gold lingered longest, outlining the clouds until they too dissolved into twilight. None of us moved until the last shimmer vanished. Only then did I notice the animals had settled. No nervous stamping or restless cries. Even the birds had quieted their evening songs. My wife's fingers twined with mine as we walked back to camp. No one spoke of supper or sleeping arrangements. We just sat around the fire pit watching embers rise toward where the rainbow had been. The children finally dozed off curled together, their faces peaceful in the flickering light. That night I dreamed in colors, vivid blues of deep water, rich browns of freshly turned earth, greens of new growth pushing through mud. When I woke at dawn, the memory of the rainbow clung like dew, coloring everything differently. Even ordinary stones along the creek seemed lit from within. The others felt it too. Shem examined his tools with new reverence. Japheth's boys helped their mother gather herbs without being asked. Ham sat longer at the fire each morning, staring at the horizon with quiet expectation. We never saw another rainbow like that first one. Later storms would bring their fragments of color, beautiful but fleeting. That was the point, I realized. The miraculous isn't meant to be commonplace. That one perfect arch remained burned behind my eyelids, a reminder that some promises don't need repeating, only remembering. Years later, when grandchildren asked about the flood, I'd tell them of the rainbow first. Not the size of the waves or the sound of rain on the roof, but the way light had broken into colors so pure they hurt to behold. How for one afternoon, the sky became a scroll and God's mercy the ink. The olive leaf dried and crumbled eventually. The arcs would weathered gray back on Ararat. But every time storm clouds gather and sunlight breaks through, I still look east. Not because I doubt the promise, but because remembering changes the one who remembers. That's the secret of the rainbow. It wasn't just God's signature in the sky. It was the moment we learned to read light as language, and in its spectrum, find terms for grace we'd never had before. Some covenants are carved in stone. Ours was written in water and light, meant to be glimpsed rather than grasped, appearing precisely when heaven and earth align to remind us. The storms end. The colors remain. The ground was softer than I remembered, as if the earth itself had been reborn tender. My first step off the ark's ramp sank deeper than expected, moist soil yielding beneath my sandal with a quiet sigh. Behind me, the children whispered excitedly, their hands gripping the rail as they waited their turn to touch dry land. I knelt instinctively, fingers pressing into dirt still cool from retreating floodwaters. An earthworm surfaced between my knuckles, its pink body glistening. First living thing we'd encountered outside our wooden world. Rain had stopped days ago, but the air still carried its scent. Wet stone and something greener underneath. The animals sensed it before we did. Deer bounded down the ramp with surprising grace, their hooves kicking up sprays of mud. Lions paused at the threshold, nostrils flaring as they tested unfamiliar breezes. Even the birds hesitated before taking wing, as if remembering how to fly after so long confined. Our valley looked foreign. Familiar landmarks had been scoured away. No more stone fences marking pasture boundaries. No orchards heavy with fruit. Just smooth contours of land rearranged by water, like a potter had reshaped the clay. Strangest of all was the silence. No crickets chirping, no distant voices calling across fields. Just 8 sets of footsteps and the occasional animal cry. Japheth was first to voice what we all felt. Where do we even start? He turned in a slow circle, arms outstretched toward empty horizons. His tunic flapped in the breeze, its fabric still carrying the ark's scent of pine and animal musk. The children adapted fastest. They raced ahead toward a distant creek, their laughter bouncing off stones still slick with moisture. My wife followed more slowly, stopping every few paces to examine new shoots pushing through mud, tender green spikes she couldn't name yet. She crouched beside a cluster of white flowers barely wider than her thumbnail, their petals trembling in the breeze. Ham found the first evidence of other survivors, a bird's nest woven into a cleft of rock, empty but perfectly intact. They came back, he murmured, running fingers over the intricate twigs. Not everything had been lost. By midday, We discovered a sheltered hollow where rainwater gathered in natural pools. Fish darted beneath the surface, tiny silver flashes that made the children squeal. Shem cupped his hands and drank deeply, water dripping into his beard. "Tastes different," he said. "Cleaner somehow, as if the flood had scrubbed more than just land." Working together, we built our first fire on dry ground. The flames crackled differently here, their smoke curling upward in thin spirals instead of collecting against wooden ceilings. Miriam roasted fish on flat stones, their skins crisping golden in the heat. We ate watching shadows lengthen across the valley, the ark's distant shape silhouetted against sunset. Evening brought discoveries. Fireflies emerged from stands of young barley, their lights pulsing sync with the stars above. An owl called from somewhere uphill, its cry answered by another farther off. Life was returning piece by piece, each arrival stitching the world back together. That first night under open sky, we slept in a tight circle around the embers. No walls meant no boundaries, just endless space stretching in every direction. The children dozed quickly, curled together like puppies for warmth. Adults took longer, our eyes adjusting to constellations unobscured by storm clouds. The moon painted everything silver, the ark on its mountainside, the winding creek below, our own outstretched hands. Morning revealed changes. Overnight, tiny mushrooms had sprouted near the fire pit. Ants marched in disciplined lines across warm stones. When Shem checked the creek, he found tadpoles darting in shallow pools. "Like the world's remaking itself," he whispered. We gathered at midday to discuss next steps, where to build shelters, which valleys showed promise for planting, how to store rainwater now that wells were gone. The conversation lasted hours, spanning countless possibilities none of us could have imagined back on Ararat. Through it all, the ark watched silently from its perch, its doors still yawning open like arms awaiting embrace. I returned alone that evening. Up close, its timbers smelled different, less like fresh-cut wood and more like something ancient settling into the earth. Pressing my palm against the hull, I felt where floodwaters had warped the grain into soft waves. This vessel that had carried us through darkness now rested where storms couldn't reach it, its purpose fulfilled. Walking back downhill, I noticed tracks, rabbit beside deer beside wolf, all leading toward the same creek. The same pattern repeated wherever I looked. Predator and prey drinking side by side, birds nesting where predators couldn't climb, new growth sprouting from cracked stone. The flood had washed away more than cities, it had reset the rules. By week's end, we'd marked boundaries for our first field. The children helped pile stones into makeshift markers while the women turned soil with salvaged tools. Ham discovered wild grapes already climbing a sun-warmed rock face. Japheth's daughter collected seeds from unfamiliar plants, her small hands sorting them into clay pots like treasured jewels. That evening, as firelight danced across tired faces, we noticed something none had anticipated. Laughter came easier here. Stories flowed freer. Hands reached quicker to help with burdens. Perhaps surviving the flood had changed us as much as the land. Or maybe we were simply remembering what clean earth felt like underfoot. Soft, forgiving, ripe with second chances. The ark grew smaller each day as we ventured farther downstream. But sometimes at dusk, when shadows stretched long across the valley, I'd glance back uphill, and for one fleeting moment, the setting sun would set its weathered timbers ablaze, golden as the first olive leaf our dove carried home. Then the light would shift, the vision fade, and I'd turn toward camp, toward supper and stories and whatever tomorrow might bring on this reborn earth. We stepped off the ark carrying more than just animals in their pens. The real weight came from what we'd learned in that wooden womb, how silence can be shelter when storms rage outside, how patience grows deeper roots than fear. My hand still remembered the exact curve of every rib in that hull, the way pitch smelled when mixed with obedience. Those memories clung like wood smoke in wool, impossible to shake loose. The animals scattered quickly once freed, lions padding toward rocky outcroppings, deer leaping across newborn streams, birds exploding into sky like scattered seeds. But we humans moved slower, our steps measured by all we'd lost and found. Japheth kept turning back to touch the ark's hull as if needing proof it had been real. Shem's children collected stones from the mountainside, piling them into small altars without being told why. Survival had changed us in ways bones remember but lips struggle to name. Simple things carried new weight now. The way Miriam instinctively portioned our food into exact measures even with abundant game nearby. How Hem double-checked every knot when we built our first shelter. The children played differently too, their games quieter, their laughter surfacing like sunlight through water. Family meant something deeper after sharing that floating world. Arguments that once burned for days now cooled within hours. Hands reached quicker to share burdens. Even in exhaustion, we noticed when someone needed the last portion of water or the warmest sleeping spot. The ark's closeness had sanded our rough edges, polished our seeing. Strange what lasts when everything else washes away. Not our finest tools or strongest ropes proved most valuable, just stubborn faithfulness. Day after day of feeding creatures, mucking stalls, checking seams while the world drowned outside. The mundane had become sacred through repetition, each chore a kind of prayer. Now on dry land, we kept those rhythms without thinking, morning inventories, evening checks of shelters, always counting to 8 without realizing it. Second chances carry weight. I felt it watching my grandchildren play on untouched earth, their footprints the first since creation's reset. With no one left to teach us but memory and God, every choice mattered doubly. Where to plant, how to build, when to move camp. The old world's mistakes hovered like ghosts, warning against greed and pride. Sometimes at dusk I'd catch Shem staring at the western horizon where our village once stood, his face lined with unspoken grief. The flood took much but left unexpected gifts, like seeing my wife's hands, once calloused from grinding grain, now gentle as she cupped a fledgling fallen from its nest. Or how Japheth, who used to chafe under family decisions, now gathered everyone's input before acting. The children treated even snakes and scorpions with cautious respect, having learned all life's fragility in that floating menagerie. Some lessons only confinement teaches, like how anger has nowhere to go in close quarters unless dissolved. How shared labor erases old hierarchies. Why routines matter more when days blur together. I could still close my eyes and hear the exact sequence of nighttime sounds. The elephants shifting weight at midnight, the owls calling near dawn, the mice rustling just before waking. Those rhythms had rewritten our bones. We didn't rebuild the old ways. Our new home faced east to catch morning light, its door wider to welcome visitors who never came. The children invented games mixing creatures that should fear each other, pouncing leopard cubs pretending to flee from lambs. At meals we left an extra portion by the fire, though no traveler ever joined us. Habits born on the ark became traditions on land without discussion. The animals kept teaching us. Watching eagles rebuild nests higher after storms showed how to site our village. Rabbits digging warrens with multiple exits inspired food storage pits. Even the termites demonstrated perfect timber curing as we salvaged ark wood for plows. Creation spoke plainly if we listened. Rain still frightened the children. At first downpour, little Miriam hid under woven mats until her brothers coaxed her out to dance in puddles. Gradually, we all learned to distinguish storm types, the gentle, nourishing rains from the bruising tempests. Each time clouds gathered, someone would glance toward Mount Ararat's distant shape, then quiet their breathing until the rainbow appeared. Years later, when grandchildren asked what the flood was like, we showed rather than told. Pressed their hands into clay to feel how gopher-wood grains swirled. Fed doves from open palms to demonstrate trust. Let them count rings in ancient trees that sprouted after the waters fell. The deepest truths resist words anyway. One evening, I found Shem's daughter playing alone near the creek. She'd built a tiny ark from twigs and leaves, carefully loading it with pebble animals. "They're safe now," she told me solemnly when I knelt beside her. The simplicity undid me. That unshakable child's faith, that storms end, that arcs hold, that morning always comes. was the real cargo we'd carried forward. The old world's errors lay buried under silt and time. Our task wasn't to recreate, but to remember. Not the drowned cities, but the moments of mercy. The feel of that first raindrop, the dove's return, the rainbow's impossible colors. Every time I held a grandchild or tasted fresh-picked figs or heard laughter across new fields, I understood some floods don't just destroy. They make space for better things to grow. We never recovered most of what the waters took, but in its place grew something rarer, eyes that saw clearer, hands that worked gentler, hearts that remembered how near salvation rides the storm. Somewhere between the first raindrop and the last, we'd learned to carry the ark inside us, not as burden, but as compass. Its weathered timbers pointing always toward mercy, its hollows humming the old tune of steadfast love that outlasts even the deepest flood. So when clouds gather in your life, remember, what feels like an ending may be God reshaping all things. The ark wasn't built in a day, but beam by beam, nail by nail, through years of ordinary obedience. Peace comes not from avoiding storms, but from learning to float on trust. Rainbows appear only after rain. May you hear whispers in the wind like I did, see hope in olive leaves, feel the ark's steady rhythm beneath you. Storms end, waters recede, and when light breaks through, it paints colors no artist could replicate. A promise arched across your sky, written just for you.